March 22nd, 2015, the Yemen war started, killing hundreds of thousands in just a few years later, the World Health Organization declared that Yemen is going through one of the worst humanitarian crises. Our guest today will be addressed as Alex Williams in order to for safety reasons, we will not discuss his real name and we won't be showing his face. I think that's everything that I have to say. We won't be disclosing his location either, but we will be hearing his voice and his experiences with the humanitarian crisis that is going on in Yemen. Thank you for coming on episode 50.
Thank you, Alex. Episode 50. Thank you, Alex.
I want to just start by saying this is very brave of you to do, because the world does really need to know what is going on in Yemen, right?
Yeah, it's good to be on here. Thanks for having me on here, guys.
You're more than welcome. You are more than welcome. So
I just want to say how hard it was to find. I was like searching. I really wanted to find someone from Yemen who's lived in Yemen to talk about the Yemen crisis that's going on. And everyone I've seen is either in different countries, like expats, right? It was so hard to find people from inside Yemen, at least on social media. Is there I don't know if you can tell me more about that. Are they just not on social media, or is it just they don't speak English, or?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not Yemeni myself, but I did spend 10 years inside of Yemen, and they're definitely out there. You can go into my podcast on the 30th episode, they are out there. They are inside Yemen. I think once you get involved in the network, you start meeting different people. But yeah, it's definitely different than looking for maybe an Emirati or a Jordanian that speaks a higher level of English.
Okay, so let's get right into it. So what was the time period you were in Yemen, so we know exactly what to ask you in?
Yeah, so I was there, I was there from basically 2005 to 2015. So those 10 years, all the way up until once the bombarding started to happen. And then I've done several trips after that as well. So.
Okay, so you've seen
my last, at the end of 2019. So it's pretty recent.
Okay, so there's no other way to describe the situation that's going on there. I mean, it is a humanitarian crisis. Children, families are starving to the point where they're starting to eat anything that's, from what I heard, anything that's green or any plant that they can see. And there is a huge amount of just, poverty, would you call it? Or can you describe to us what's going on and what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's 80% of the population is in need of humanitarian aid. So, it goes from even the people that had jobs before. You have to keep in mind that things have gotten more expensive. So even the person that was making any amount of money, now transportation is 500% more expensive. Vegetables, bread, all the basics are much more expensive. So your purchasing power, you've lost purchasing power. So it's not just the kind of the poor people that were already poor. It's also the middle class that was middle class. Now the money that you did have, now it's basically worth nothing. I mean, you can barely make ends meet. So that's just to give you an idea of what the situation is like in Yemen. And then you've got to make hard decisions as a father. So you might have, let's say you had $100 worth of money or $50 worth of money. You have to decide now, do you use it for food, or do you use it to take care of your kid who may have gotten cholera, or may have gotten some other disease. So now as a father, you have to decide, do I feed my family? Do I take care of them? Forget paying rent or forget about doing those kind of things. So you've got a lot of life and death situations that the average Yemeni is having to face at this point.
Mm. And it's like a
And
daily thing that they have to make these kind of choices. It's not like a few days and it's gone. It's been like this for quite some time now.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, the situation in Yemen has been very difficult. I mean, even from before the the airstrikes began in March 2015. But I mean, now the war has basically made everything worse. And so you have situation like the cholera. Uh, there was over 1 million cases of cholera. It was one of the worst. I think it was the worst recorded crisis of cholera worldwide. So, I mean, this was before we even get into talking about COVID-19 in Yemen. This is before that. We were already dealing with a war and these kind of sicknesses.
how did cholera spread? What's the trace behind it?
Well, I mean, cholera, there's water and sanitation and hygiene problem around the country. You have, problems with sewage in many different areas. If you get outside of the main cities of Sana'a and Aden and all these main cities, even in those cities, you have a really serious sewage issue. So if you have heavy rains like they do have every season, you have many areas that you don't have proper sewage, and then you also have a waste system problem where you have waste not being picked up. So you leave that going on even if you leave that going on for a week, you have a serious problem very quickly.
And then COVID came in, and how'd that
Well,
affect
yeah.
everything post that?
I mean, of course. I mean, it's a nightmare. I mean, it came in April 10th, 2020. The first case was reported in Hadramaut, in the eastern part of the country. At first people thought, well, I mean, maybe because Yemen was so isolated, it wouldn't, it prolonged getting to Yemen. But I mean, eventually, it did arrive to Yemen, to all governors inside of Yemen right now. And I think one of the main issues with that is, we think about the two messaging that we're hearing in the West or even in the other parts of the Middle East is it's important to isolate yourself socially. And then the second thing, they talk about washing your hands. Well, okay, well, let's look at that now in the Yemen context. How do you isolate yourself socially if you live day in and day out? You've got to go to work and be in these markets just to survive. So you can't even do that. And then the second issue is, well, how do you wash your hands with no water? Where are you going to get water from? And so there's so many areas where you've got women. It's often the women that are walking 2, 3, 4 hours every trip to go get water. And that water is not like it's good water. It's
Cholera infested.
not good water to drink. Exactly. And so these are the kind of things that they're trying to face COVID-19, but yet, they don't have the basic things to deal with that. That's just for starters, regarding COVID-19.
Interesting. Okay, before we go on any further, obviously, if we ask any questions that you cannot answer, it's totally fine if you can just say, I can't answer that, or I'm not allowed to answer that, or, you can just say. So don't worry about a question, like if we ask and you feel like you can't answer. Because we are, again,
No problem.
We are clueless. As much news as we read, as much papers as it's not the same as living in and seeing it with your own eyes. So if we do ask any question and you cannot answer, it's okay, right?
No problem. Sounds good.
So I'm not sure if I can ask you this or not, but what is it that you do in Yemen? Is it like humanitarian aid, or?
Yeah, I work as a consultant for humanitarian aid and development organizations. So
Mhm.
you often have a gap between the West and the East. You have the West is often asking for, you know, they want to, there may be an idea or a concept to do either food distribution or an education project. And of course, a Western donor is asking for a proposal. They want to know what your outcomes are, what you're going to do with it, and what the budget is, what's the breakdown, how is money going to be properly used. And on the Yemeni side, there's also got to be a reality check. You have these large INGOs that are asking for, um, quite due diligence on financial policies and receipts. Well, okay, if you live in Yemen and you grab a taxi, I want to see you ask the taxi driver for a receipt, see what happens when you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
you're gonna go
Yes.
get breakfast, and you're gonna go
Mhm.
to this hole in the wall. Okay, well, go ask for a receipt that's stamped. So,
Why? What
Mhm.
happens
so
if you ask
often
for a receipt?
I mean, it's just they'll look at you like in some places it's like a
Mhm.
joke, like it's like non-existent,
Imagine
in
going
some
like
of these.
Lebanon. Like Lebanon's the same situation kind of where it's like you can't go in like a taxi cab and just say, "Hey, can I have a receipt for the?" Right? It's
Okay,
just
he'll
you
just
know what I mean. It's like you can't go like any place and buy like a manouche, right? And just say, I don't know. There are like some hole in the wall places, and I'm sure like in
Mhm.
Yemen,
Exactly.
similar.
Okay.
Right. And so it's like that's one simple example of how you have to have these two worlds meet together.
Hmm.
And that's often what I do is to help, reviewing proposals and budgets and also, doing a kind of a capacity assessment. You have local NGOs in the country that say, oh, yeah, I can do this and we can do these many households and we can do that. Well, can you really, do you have an accounting system? Is there
Hmm.
somebody that can come into the country and check to make sure that you are for real? So that does require somebody to do that understands the culture and language to do that.
Okay. So before we discuss this,
Hmm.
let's try and let's go back a little bit and like look at these simple questions that I'm sure not a lot of people know the answers to. What started the whole situation that's happening in Yemen?
Hmm.
Well, I mean, there was a disgruntled, uh, the Houthis that were from the northern part of the country. They're from an area called Saada in the northern part that borders Saudi Arabia. And they have, even before 2015, they were, um, feeling that they were being marginalized. There had been some smaller wars that happened even before 2015. So they took opportunity that the population was feeling. There was at the point when they came into Sana'a, they came in from the north. You can see on your map from
Mhm.
Sada, and they came all the way down to Sana'a, and they basically took over the capital city, and they started to keep going down, and they went all the way down to Aden, and they continued to fight in Aden until the Southerners basically kicked them out. And so now the borderline is somewhere in Taiz. Taiz is one of the split cities. It's one of the cities that's seen some of the toughest fighting. So that's when Abdul Rabbu, the recognized president of Yemen, um, he left to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia began to get involved with a coalition, and they started to bomb, with the excuse of returning the legitimate
Hmm.
government per se. But keep in mind, Abdul Rabbu, he came to power in a one ballot vote. He was the only one on the ballot. So some would say, how legitimate is that?
Hmm.
Um, all to say, it became, in many people's view, a proxy war. Iran backing the Houthis, and Saudi Arabia backing up Abdul Rabbu's government.
Mhm.
So that, in short, is how it began.
And why were the Houthis like against Abdul Rabbu? I think is how you say his name. I'm not sure because I haven't heard of him, to be honest.
Right.
But the
Right.
legitimate,
Well,
the legitimate, I can't say the word, but you know who I'm talking about, right?
right. Right. Well, they had felt that they were marginalized since Ali Abdullah Saleh, since he was in power. He had been in power for many years, and they had already felt like marginalized since then. So I don't think it was necessarily against Abdul Rabbu, but it was against the current sitting government. They felt they weren't being given their rights. They felt they were marginalized and basically had enough of that and decided to take it into their own hands.
hmm Okay, and all of this has led to obviously the GCC countries and the United States sending their planes and airstrikes and all that stuff. So we know that this happened, but what people often don't record or don't take interest in is once these airstrikes happened, how did it affect the lives of normal civilians? People who have nothing to do
Oh,
with what's going on.
Mhm.
I mean, I've been living in the country during airstrikes, and and basically it puts you into a prison. You're basically in a prison, which is your home, right? Because you have airstrikes, you have snipers, so you have to think about how am I going to get food every day? And when you have airstrikes, you also have to think about the like I said, the petrol goes up. You have to think about all these different things that it takes to survive. There's no power, so you have to think, well, how am I gonna charge my phone? How am I gonna have any kind of electricity? So you'll hear when you hear on my show, I talk a lot about a resilient people, because when Yemenis didn't have power, they started thinking about green solutions. When they didn't have water, because they don't get water from the city, they
Mhm.
started to catch water from the rain. So they had rainwater catchment systems. So whenever Yemen is hit, they always seem to come back with a solution. And,
Mhm.
and that's why when I look at the situation as a third party, I say, you know, there is no amount of bombing. I mean, there's been now 5 years of bombing, and Yemenis are resilient. The people they're bombing are going about their lives as best as they can, and so I don't really see that the Abdul Rabbu government has any viability or any will have any respect moving forward. So I think that's one thing that's hard to imagine why they continue with this bombardment.
hmm Okay. Uh, so let's talk a little bit about your experiences and what you've seen personally happening in Yemen. So you visited all the cities that you've mentioned, right?
Yes, I've visited them all. I mean, the
So
ones that I've mentioned, yeah.
so you visited uh, Taiz is how you say it.
Yeah, Taiz
And that's
and
where it's hit
Sana'a and
hardest. Ties is where it's hit the hardest, right?
yeah,
Right, still. Mhm.
hmm
Thai has seen a lot of the fighting. So a lot of this, street fighting. So they've had airstrikes, but
Mhm.
they've also had a lot of street fighting because the city has been split. You've
Mhm.
got one side being, you know, is backed by the Abdul Rabbu government, by the Saudi-led coalition, and then the other side is run by the Houthis. So you've had basically, in a way, like this kind of trench warfare where the line has gone back, not much over the last 5 years. And so the people of Taiz have really been hit, very hard. And of course, the cities around Taiz have been affected because you have all these internally displaced people that have left Taiz to go into surrounding cities like Ib and other areas.
Mhm. So there are safer cities right now, or would you say generally Yemen, most of it's affected by this?
Well, the entire country is affected in some way or another because the economy has gone down the drain if there
Mhm.
was one before that. The education system has gone down the drain as well. The health system has gone down as well. But of course, there are cities that are, if you can say better, you know, it's like I would say it's better to live in Ib. It's better right now to be in Mukalla rather than, you know, in Taiz or in Sada, which basically just was flattened. I mean, they basically just, you know, bombarded the entire city as they considered that a combatant area, since that was where the Houthis were from.
All right.
Which was, you said that was in the north, right?
Right, which was in the north. Or even recently, you know, there was a split between the Saudi-led coalition and the Southern Transitional Council. You know, there was a split inside of the Saudi-led coalition, and so there was some fighting in the south even just recently.
Interesting. All right, and there's not too much place for Yemeni people to go right now, right? Other than within Yemen, are they going to Saudi? Are they going to different Arab countries? What's the situation?
Well,
Mhm.
well, the thing is, it's like, you know, you have the Gulf countries that are behind a lot of this bombing, and yet they're not allowed to go to these countries to take refuge. So they're often left going to Djibouti, which is basically, you know, it's a
Closest.
45-degree weather all year round. It's some people would call it worse. I mean, even now there's Africans from Somalia and other nations coming to Yemen. Can you imagine? So you think about how
Oh my
bad their
God.
countries are if
Yikes.
they're risking it to go to Yemen.
Mhm.
You know, so
Mhm.
there's not a lot of places you can go as a Yemeni. I think the kingdom of Jordan has received, you know, quite a bit of them. Egypt has received some of them, but it's you know, for a Yemeni going to Jordan is very expensive, you know, and so it's still very limiting where Yemenis can actually go to.
Okay. So, what are your comments on like the coalition and like the efforts that's been put? Do you see that there has been a difference, or is there, you know, like, I want to hear your opinion on this subject.
On their efforts in what? In the war?
Yeah, against the Houthis.
I mean, you know, there's Yemenis that I speak to that are educated.
Hmm.
There are, one of their main issues is, even those that weren't that involved before, one of their main issues is what they call يعني التدخل, which is, you know, interference. You know, I think that's one of their main issues. Yeah,
Okay.
إنه تدخلوا, you know, there was an outside interference. So there are many people, it's not like you're pro-Houthi and you're against Saudi-led coalition, but it's just the fact that, you know, they're being bombarded by this outside force that is now trying to divide up the country and decide who's going to be in the leadership of it. So, I mean, my main opinion is that the war, it is very easy for the war to stop, because without ammunition, without US, UK, Canadian, and all these other countries selling weapons to the Saudi-led coalition, there would be no war. So if you don't have weapons and you don't have more bullets, the war is going to stop. You know, the Saudis can't continue with this war on their own. They can't do it with the coalition. They need intelligence. They need weaponry. They need refueling. They knew all these things. And so I think my opinion is that I think that there needs to be a strong sense from the people, say, you know, pressure in the government, in the parliament, globally, that this war is inhumane and wrong on every level, and it should stop. And I think then people can start then discussing, well, who needs to be at the table to start discussing how things should be governed in Yemen.
Okay.
And whose responsibility is that? I mean, would the UN be in charge of organizing something like that, or I don't know how this works.
I mean, the reality is, the reality is that top influencers have to be, involved. You have to have the U.S. involved, and you have to have, the key players on the Security Council that are making these decisions. They have to be fully involved, and they have to be involved in not selling weapons. I mean, you had just the UK recently restart selling weapons to Yemen again, even though it's clearly proven that their weapons have been used to destroy schools. Children have been killed because of these weapons. And so, again, why is it not happening? Well, the sad reality is, making weapons and selling weapons creates jobs and helps people to get reelected. So that's a reality that's there in the world. But I believe that if there's enough noise, if there's enough pressure, if there's enough lobbying, you do have certain senators in the United States, and you have different parliamentaries in the UK that have begun to make a voice against the war. And I think that's what, I think that's why these podcasts, and that's why all the opportunities to speak about this need to be a louder voice.
And this is why we also have you here. Now, was there any like donations by any country that helped somewhat improve the lives of Yemen or the Yemenis? That, like, I don't
I
know,
mean,
was there or?
let me ask you a question. If I go bomb your house and then the next day I said, hey, here's a fruit basket, how do you feel about that? So that's a little bit
True.
of what it's like. Okay,
Mhm.
so the Saudi-led coalition, it's clear. Who's bombing? The Yemenis will say it's the Saudi-led coalition. It's saying to the Western countries that we're being bombed. Why is the richest country in the AP being bombed? Why is the poorest country of the AP being bombed by the richest country of the AP? I mean, how is that right on any level? And so if then you say, oh, my poor neighbor, I just bombed you, but here's some rice. You guys know Arab culture, like haram, on every level, you know, and then on top of that, which we have to keep in mind, we don't often realize that in the West, is Yemen is a tribal society. So Yemen is like the Pashto. There's a high level of honor. There's a high level of honor in this, and so they don't forget. If
Mhm.
somebody kills your brother, if somebody kills your father, you don't just forget because somebody gave you some rice.
I
If you
know about
understand
this
what I'm
because I
saying.
come from a tribe that originated from Yemen. 90% of the tribes originated from Yemen. So when you say Yemen is very tribal, it only makes sense to me. So I do actually understand that, yes,
And
this is a
Mm,
thing, right? So
right.
you're absolutely right on like what you said. I'm trying to pick and see what I can counter argue, but there really isn't, to be honest. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I have been trying to think, okay, what's he saying? Maybe I can. No, everything you've said it's true.
the truth, yeah.
Yeah, like I can't
Mhm.
argue with that.
Mhm.
That's completely right. It's disgusting.
Mhm.
It's completely disgusting what's happening. Like how
And
it doesn't make sense to me that a rich, relatively, let's say, rich country is just like bombing the shit out of a poor country.
Mhm.
Doesn't.
Mhm.
You were gonna say, Ali?
yeah, it's not right. I'm just thinking about like, so why are people still fighting? And I think maybe you answered that is that it's a tribal maybe mentality, is that someone got killed in the past and this is just vengeance for everything that's happened, and that's why the cycle is still going. Like, who is like, people are selling weapons. You said UK are selling weapons to Yemen, but who is fighting right now? And what do they take? What do they
Well,
gain from fighting?
I mean, it is it's more complicated than just the Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition. You have other factions inside the country that are taking advantage of this. You have Al Qaeda, you have
Hmm.
ISIS. You have other extremist Islamic parties. You know, they're happy to go kill Houthis. You know, you have the Houthis. They are more than happy to kill the Islahis or these other Islamic parties or Al Qaeda. So you have other factions that are taking advantage of the situation on the ground that are continuing with this war. And that's why I think that selling weapons to the Saudi-led coalition, I mean, I was there in Yemen. I was there when weapons landed in different parts of Yemen. And people telling me that they can guarantee that those weapons went to the Saudi-led coalition, that none of those weapons got to Al Qaeda or ISIS, man, that is really hard to believe that that was
Wait,
the
wait, wait,
case.
wait.
And now
Say
we
it
can
again.
see
Wait, no.
what I'm
Again, sorry, because like I didn't understand. So you're saying, just say that again,
what
please.
I'm saying is that what I'm saying is you're selling weapons, right? You're from Sweden or you're from Canada or the US. You're selling weapons to the Saudi-led coalition, right? Now, when they make these contracts, there's all these stipulations where they can be used and how they can be used and who can use them. Now, when I was in the country during the war, and I was in areas where there was Al Qaeda and there was Saudi-led coalition, and they were fighting against the Houthis. And if somebody told me, no, we guarantee that the weapons that came from Sweden, that they only went to the Saudi-led coalition, that they didn't go to other Islamic extremist factions, I would say that's, that's really hard to believe. That those weapons didn't get to other factions. In a situation like Yemen, and so that's why I would say it's very irresponsible for these Western nations to be selling weapons to the Saudi-led coalition, because you cannot guarantee that these weapons will
We'll
not
stay with
reach
the Saudi.
extremists.
I'm sure there's like selling in between, right? Even if it lands all the way to Saudi, doesn't mean that they won't sell it to other people as well. I guess.
I'm sure it lands to Saudi. It's not the Saudi is not the problem. The problem is when it goes from Saudi, it goes into Taiz or it goes into Aden. Okay, once it gets there, okay, then there's fighting. Okay, you're telling me that none of those weapons have ever gotten to any member of AQAP or other factions? That's hard to believe.
But how is it reaching them? Like, how is it reaching these Islamic terrorists, like extremist groups? If it's supposed to be for Saudi Arabian coalition army men, are like?
Yeah, but who is in the, we have to ask ourselves, who is part of this coalition? Who is fighting against the Houthis? You've got AQAP that's fighting against the Houthis.
What's
You've got
AQAP?
ISIS that's fighting against Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So you've got Al Qaeda fighting against the Houthis, ISIS fighting against the Houthis, and you have the Saudi-led coalition, the army of Abdul Rabbu. All of those different factions are sometimes mixed in together. And so for somebody to tell me that the weapons only go to one person, or there's never a case where these weapons land in somebody else's hands, that to me is what's hard to believe. And that's why I believe it's irresponsible on every level to sell weapons to such a war. But I'm saying, even if you did, you can't guarantee that your weapons aren't being used, with extremists or to kill innocent people.
Oh man. Well, to move it on to the next thing, Alex.
Before we do, sorry, 1 second. I just want to ask, what about the other side? So we talked about these sides and how they're gaining their weapons. What about the Houthis? How are they getting their weapons? Is it from Iran, you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's many that believe that that it's from the Iranian regime that's receiving those weapons. And again, there is no for most Yemenis, many Yemenis will tell you, you start talking to them and it's not like one is for the Houthis and one is against. No, it's clear. They're both committing war crimes. against humanity, against the Yemeni people. Both sides are doing that. And that's why I believe it puts a greater responsibility on the international community that is providing the weapons to these two parties.
Okay.
All right,
It's hard
Alex, I just
to believe, but okay, yeah. And
thinking.
it's not
Yeah,
just,
no, it's
I
not
don't know
hard
what
to. I mean, it makes.
I don't
Yeah,
know what
just
to
like
say.
things
I'm
happen in
speechless, to
war.
be honest.
Yeah, in war. My question is, so you said you've been there for like 10 years now, and maybe half of those 10 years have been war stricken, and I'm not sure about the state of Yemen before. So, what made you want to go to Yemen, and why did you stick through all this time, and why are you still so involved with Yemen specifically? What?
Well, I wanted to go to a country that was kind of that's probably due to the stereotypical idea of the Arab world back in the West.
Mhm.
What the Arab world would be. You're thinking like, 15th century, I don't know, desert camels. You get to the Middle East and you go to Dubai, Lebanon, you know, even Amman,
It's
and
not
it's
that.
like
Mhm.
Starbucks, McDonald's, and
Yeah,
so
it's true.
I eventually got to I visited. Some guy told me, he's like, hey, you should go visit Yemen. I was like, where first of all, where is Yemen? And then I went there. And when I got there, I was like, wow, this place is crazy. This place is like the Wild West, like all these people. And there's, the old city in Sana'a and their traditional wear and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of attracted me. And then I started to work in this niche of, consulting in humanitarian aid and development. And that's how I stuck around and then, stayed around for it. Towards the end of my time there, I realized, all this news was coming out about Yemen, but I knew Yemen from meeting these people, such nice people, such welcoming people, all these success stories. And so that's why I said, man, I feel responsible to get some of their stories out to the world so that the world can see like, hey, there's people out there that are really developing themselves and that are for the peace building process and that are doing great things. And so that's what got me doing this podcast.
Interesting. Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah,
There's no
it's
Starbucks in Yemen. There's no Starbucks in Yemen. No McDonald's.
Sorry, no Starbucks, no McDonald's.
Well, I've never been to a country without Starbucks and McDonald's. What's like the culture in Yemen? Is it just
Well, I
very
mean,
Easternized, not Westernized still, or
yeah,
what's
I mean,
it?
it's not westernized, but again, the positive of that is you have there's a lot of positives to a tribal community. You have a strong community. You have, you have a strong feeling of family. I mean, if you've been to the Near East, in Lebanon and Iraq and in Jordan, you already know how welcoming the people are at. So, but imagine Yemen is even more than that
Mhm.
in how hospitable they are, and that's all due to their tribal culture. And so
yes.
there's a lot of history there, and there's a lot of history there and a lot of things that as a foreigner are very attractive to you. Being foreign, you're welcomed by them.
Yep. I think they call it the karam, being very hospitable and kind, and never saying no to your guests. This is all part of tribal like culture,
Yeah.
especially in Yemen. And that's true. But like all of this becomes harder when the situation around you is against you being kind and giving and hospitable when you can't afford these basic necessities for yourself, right? So my question is, how has this impacted on the tribes of Yemen?
I think that the core of who they are, of family and helping the stranger, I think the core is still there. I think what's sad is that the political parties and the war has put a lot of pressure on many tribes to fight for things that they have no desire to be fighting for. They just want to, raise their family, get their kids educated and live in peace. Where now you have, the country is more and more divided. Every single month the war continues. So it has put a lot of pressure on the families, on the different areas. I mean, back in the day, I remember traveling out in the east, in the north, up in the mountains, and in Hodeida, all over the country. It was not a problem at all. And then, from 2010 onward, it was basically, you could feel the situation getting hotter,
Mhm.
and there were more, incidents of kidnappings, assassinations of, different people. And so it definitely, the country started to change over the years.
It's hard to hear. I'm not gonna
It's
lie.
hard. Mhm.
It's really hard to, like.
What are
My
yeah?
heart
What are
goes out
the
to the people of Yemen,
My heart
honestly.
goes out to the people of Yemen. So yeah, tell us more about the beauty of Yemen, the different places to see. Because I don't know too much about Yemen. I'm from Arabia, and I was from Arabia. It's just that Yemen's always been a little bit more isolated of a country. I guess like Egyptian culture, everyone knows about Egyptian culture in Arabia, right? Or like Emirati culture, or like maybe Lebanese culture.
Right.
But tell us about tell us a little bit about Yemeni culture. What's
I mean,
mhm.
something that, and people probably get tired of me saying this, but Yemeni people, they are so resilient,
Mhm.
and if you could break that out, resilient, it is the idea that you're getting kicked, you're getting kicked, and you're not, you didn't do anything, and you still get kicked, and you still get up over and over and over again. And I think what people don't realize is that, imagine you're Yemeni, right? So you don't have anything to lose. How do you think that you're going to defeat a party? You're going to defeat somebody who has nothing to lose.
Mhm.
That's impossible. Whereas an Emirati or a Saudi, they have a lot to lose. They have riches, they have homes, they have their family. Yemenis have nothing to lose. And I think that's why you see them just get up. They keep getting up. People tell them you can't travel, you can't get an education, and then you see them. They got an education, they get a master's degree, you get a PhD. I've talked to Yemenis that people laugh at them when they're like, "You're going to be a singer." I've interviewed in my episodes people, Yemenis that are now, are singers, are known, internationally as a singer.
Mhm.
I spoke to just yesterday to Khalid Tuwaiti. He's a fighter. He's 6-0 right now, and so you've got all these different Yemenis from the political world, journalists, actors, boxers in different areas that basically their whole life they were given no cards. They were given nothing. But just because they're resilient, they now just go on, and they've basically proven, and that's pretty much what this podcast is about. Yemen News is about highlighting the Yemenis that, despite the struggle, despite the war, they've come out of basically the dirt, the dust, or the ashes, and have now proven that no, they can do it.
That's very admirable. Are there? So you said there's no electricity right now in Yemen. How does that? What is
Yeah, the
mhm,
majority of the country doesn't have electricity.
at
So you
all?
have some
Like, mhm,
at all.
mhm.
So most people are relying on solar power, or they're relying on generators, or you have a very small part of the country that has a little bit of power, like Aden and Madib
Mhm.
has some power.
Aren't generators and solar power expensive though? Like how
Yeah, they're
people
very
get access to it?
expensive.
Yeah. So how? Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very expensive. And so what you often do is you may have a neighborhood that has a generator, and you may have seen this on social media where you have one guy as a shop, and then he's got like one strip on the ground, and there's like 50 phones being charged. So when I say
Uh-huh.
electricity,
Mhm.
You know, don't think, you know, they've all got their Xboxes going on in their home or something like that.
Mhm. But everyone has a phone, right? For the most part in Yemen, it's like that's more mainstream. Or
I mean, I would say a phone is more mainstream. I wouldn't say a smartphone is, though.
interesting.
You
Okay,
know,
that's
you
interesting you
remember
say.
what it was like. You remember
Hmm.
you remember what it was like when we used to have those Nokia phones, you know?
Yeah.
How we used to type. We used to type so fast on those little Nokia phones. You
Two,
know,
two, two,
that's
three,
still, those
three,
are
four,
still
four, four, four.
around.
Yeah, I remember that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man, that's crazy that like this is still going on. Like,
Mhm.
if you take away this phone right here and you give me like a Nokia phone now, I would die. I wouldn't be able to, you know, I wouldn't be
Mhm.
able to cope. But
It's like
these
it's like
poor,
do what you're doing. Do what you're doing now with the Nokia phone.
no man, you can't. There's no way.
Well, people are
Back
doing it.
back
And
then,
yeah.
before you
Mhm.
sent a text, you have to get like you have to revise your text with every person in the house just to make sure it's understandable. Because it was expensive. It was like you had to pay like what 20 fils, Kuwaiti fils for like one text message. So you had to
Oh,
make sure,
that's yeah.
right, and it was completely understandable.
That's funny.
You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
because now
Yeah.
it's like oh WhatsApp connect to the internet. You know, just send. You can like
Hmm.
I don't know. Ellie, have you ever
The
sent voice?
internet.
Yeah.
Wait,
Oh,
yeah. Tell us about the internet. Yeah, what is allowed? What's not? Is everything like I don't know, social media,
Oh
all that
man. I
jazz?
mean,
Yeah. Hmm.
I talk to media guys all the time,
Hmm.
you know, and it's like it's unbelievable. You know, you can see on my account I've got all these little videos of media guys that send me stuff and they send me footage of Yemen, and it's like if you know anything about video, you have to render the video. So if you change something, you have to render it again. And so sometimes they're like, "Yeah, I just rendered it. It'll be ready like in 15 hours." So like sometimes what it takes us like 5 minutes to render, 10 minutes to render a video, it might take them, you know, 16 hours.
Wow.
And
Hmm.
then if there's a power cut
Hmm.
or if the internet just didn't work, wow, you got
start
to
Start
do it
over.
again.
again.
Yikes.
Start
Wow.
again,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
Or I've sent them like a voice message, which is like a minute, a minute, a minute and a half voice message, which for us is nothing. I mean, like we
Hmm.
can send videos, and for them, they're like, you know, hey, I didn't answer because I had to go up on the mountain and I had my phone up and I was just trying to get the connection long enough to get your voice message. That's why I didn't answer back so quickly.
Wait, what?
Wow.
Wait, you're talking about our message when we messaged you.
No, 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 no.
I'm talking about like just a regular audio message on WhatsApp that would be like 60 seconds. You know, that is a struggle for many
Mhm.
parts of Yemen right now.
So, but other than it being slow, are there any restrictions or censorship within Yemen or the news media?
I mean, I think the main issue is the fact that there's not a good connection. I mean, people can't
Hmm.
just stream things. People can't get access to information like we can.
Hmm.
I think that's one of the biggest issues. There's not so much the censorship aspect of it, but it is the fact that they don't have access to it.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's not a priority when you're worried about food, cholera, corona. I mean,
War.
you know,
Hmm.
it's not like, yeah, war. I
Hmm.
mean, a sniper, you know, you go outside. I remember, you know, being in my home, and we had there was it was getting very intense, and we had kind of like this guard that was out there, and it was during the last periods that we were there, and I was walking out of my front door and he was walking towards me, and there was probably a meter between me and him, and all of a sudden we hear this thing go just like a wind with a whistle, and we both stepped back. We both stepped back, and it was a bullet that had come from another area of the city. And we both looked at each other and we were like, wow. I mean, it was crazy. It was one of those moments like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, this is something else. So this is the kind of situation that Yemenis are facing on a normal daily basis. And so they're definitely not thinking about, hey, are you on, TikTok or on Snapchat? That's not the
Mm-hmm.
conversation they're having.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think part of the Arab Spring, what made it kind of successful, was the use of internet and social media, people on Facebook, right? Right now with George Floyd, Instagram, social media was huge and like shining light on the different injustices. So I wonder just if if Yemen had better resources to internet, or to share awareness, maybe could, could help.
Would the world act in a different way?
I mean,
Well,
I don't know. Hmm.
I mean, well, I think, I think that there is probably more people speaking or posting about Yemen. Probably, I'm not saying it's a lot, but I'm saying more than probably there ever has been. And I'm not saying that's still a lot. I think there's got to be a lot more influencers. You know, you've got influencers that, they're making, thousands of dollars per post for showing a bag or something, or some Gucci bag.
Hmm.
It's, you got to have more people that are behind them, influencers speaking about, and I think people are sometimes scared. People are sometimes scared of, like, am I being too political? And I think that people can step away from that when they can see, like, hey, we're not asking you to be pro Saudi coalition or pro Houthi or even take a side here. We're just saying, get behind the motto, or get behind the message that says, stop the war. Just stop the war in Yemen. Just stop bombing Yemen. Stop weapons inside Yemen. And I think that's kind of a global message that you can give without making people feel that they need to, you have to be like a
Hmm.
Saudi hater or Emirati hater or an Iran hater. No, that's not the message that we're trying to give.
It's not pro any of these. It's pro
Hmm.
life, pro human beings. You
Anti-war.
know,
It's true. Hmm.
because
Hmm.
it's like, just like so far the total numbers. I'm looking at the numbers now, and it's like 80 to 90,000 kids have died purely off of just starvation, not even war related, just starvation.
Yeah. So what do you
Star-
think? What do you think are like? So you said war. The stopping the war might be the most immediate fix to or at least to stabilize the situation.
Mhm.
What are like two or three other major things to focus on in Yemen to help it get back to where it was?
Well, I mean, I think that, you have humanitarian organizations that are doing, mostly they're focusing on life-saving activities, basically, which is food and
Hmm.
water. But the other thing we can't forget to focus on, and I spoke to Tariq Hassan, he's working in sustainable development in Yemen. He was episode 26 that we did. And he brought an important point. He said, yes, food and water and health is so important, but let's not forget education. Like, if we just neglect education for, I mean, let's just say in your countries, we're like, hey, let's just put a stop on education for 5 years.
Hmm.
What would that do to the next generation? Why would
Destroy
we
them.
be surprised?
Hmm.
Yeah, why would we be surprised later when the upcoming leaders aren't apt to lead the country because we neglected education? So I think supporting education initiatives inside of Yemen is important, and it's not sidelined to just doing, wash or food or health.
Interesting. Okay, we are, unfortunately, I really wanted to continue speaking about this, but we are reaching our time limit. My closing monologue, I think, would be just like, yes, there are all these wars around the world, but no country has taken it so bad as much as Yemen, to the
Hmm.
point where it is one of the worst humanitarian crisis to this day, right? Uh, it's not just like a little bit of people. It's, as you heard from our good friend Alex, it is 80% of the population, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's correct. They need
80%.
some form of humanitarian aid.
So obviously, I'm going to leave a link in the description to where you can donate.
Check out his pod.
Yeah. Also, we'll leave a link to his podcast if you want to find out more about what's going on in Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to say. I'm honestly
Alex, what do you suggest for like people like me and Ali, or like anyone listening? What is the best way to
help out.
to help out? Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I definitely think what you're already doing, you know, again, it's like there's certain issues around the world that are trendy. You know, they're just trendy. They're. I'm not saying that people shouldn't get behind the Black Lives movement that matters. Those are all important issues, but Yemen isn't trendy. You know what I mean? It's not cool to talk about Yemen and that type of thing. And I think the more people that we can connect with and talk about these issues in an intelligent way, I think that's one of the biggest things that you can do. You know, donating, of course, is also an area people can get involved with, even on a small level. But I think everybody has a circle of influence, and if everybody brings up these areas of Yemen, the topic of Yemen, without getting into a side, I think that's where we're going to have some of the greatest impact.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank
you for coming on our show.
So yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
having me.
You're more than welcome. If you've made it
Thanks
this
for having
far,
me, guys.
if you've made it this far into the video, please donate something. Do anything you can do to help Yemen and its people. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you. Is there anything you want to shout out other than your podcast?
No, thanks for having me, guys. I think what you guys are doing is great. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're lucky to have you on today. Thank you very much. Anyways, thank you for watching another episode. Good night.